Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Thanks very much for joining me today. So on this podcast, we're going to look at a standard for sustainable event management, ISO 2012-1. And you might ask the question, well, why have a standard just for the events industry when other industries don't have one? Well, I'll tell you why. The events industry in the UK alone, and obviously bear in mind this is an international standard, so the figure's going to be much bigger than this, but in the UK, the events industry is actually worth almost £40 billion. That's £39.1 billion, which accounts for about 30% of the UK visitor economy, so it's quite significant. And obviously this includes all sorts of different events, from music events to sporting events, exhibitions, festivals and cultural events. So it's awesome that this is so brilliant for our economy and for getting people together and have a great time. But sorry to put a dampener on this, the sad fact is that these events are having a really devastating impact on our planet. According to the stats from RAP, many events only recycle about 15% of the waste from these events, and the rest just gets tipped into landfill. And if we just look at one sector within the events industry, which is the music industry, the music industry alone creates about 23,500 tonnes of waste a year, and again only about 32% of that, according to the stats, is recycled. So recognising that something needed to be done about this massive waste that's going on within the industry, a standard for sustainable events was created. And it was created by the events industry for the events industry. And that standard is known today as ISO 2012-1. And just to give you a bit of background, 2012-1 is applicable to any size organisation that either runs or hosts an event. And it's for organisations that want to improve their sustainability and not just pay lip service, that they actually want to put plans in place that can demonstrate actionable results. And what the standard does is it provides a framework for these organisations to establish an event sustainability management system. And this system, it doesn't just help to reduce the negative impacts of events, but it also helps them to capitalise on the more positive impacts through improved planning and processes. Now, this standard, as with many others, did actually start out as a British standard, BS 8901, back in 2009. And at Blackmores, we have been implementing that standard since then. So it's actually only launched as an ISO standard at the 2012 Olympics in London. And that's where it gets the number from, ISO 2012. Unfortunately, it had to have a 1 on the end because it didn't have enough numbers on there as an ISO, so it's ISO 2012-1. But what I think it's helped to do is, over the years, is really push the topic of sustainability to the top of the events management companies' agendas, which has been long needed. But I think one of the things that not many people realise is that it's not just about the running of events and managing waste at an event, but it's looking at leaving a positive legacy behind as well. So that's not just the environmental aspects, but also economic and the social benefits as well. So I know that in Qatar, when they were looking at this standard for the football events, they were looking at, okay, so if we're building these stadiums, because the stadiums didn't exist before, how can we best use that from a social perspective? So what that meant is that they were actively encouraging people within the communities to be able to use those venues after the sporting event. One of the many questions that we get asked about this particular standard is the scope of certification, because it's not that clear cut. So if I just kind of give you two main examples on how this standard can be applied. One is for the venue, Okay, so this is where we've implemented 2012 1 for organisations like Wembley Stadium. Okay, so it was actually the venue that was certified. We've also done this with the brewery in London, which is a venue that hosts about 700 events, generally corporate events, each year in the City of London. And the podcast that's going to follow this is actually going to feature an interview with Aransa, who's the Quality Assurance Director at the brewery, so hopefully you'll find that interesting. And she'll help to put into context some of the things that we cover within this particular standard. The other option is for an events organiser to achieve certification and to have that event management system in place. So what this means is that an events organiser, so that could be an organisation like Informa, who are one of the largest global events management organisations globally. And by the way, if you want to hear their interview, it's episode 17. That's an interview with Lucille Ryan, who's the Sustainability Manager for Informa. So this applies to the events organisers like Informa or companies that organise a lot of events themselves. So it could be a large corporate organisation, but they run a number of conferences and congresses throughout the year, and they want to make those sorts of events a bit more sustainable. So they can also go for certification as well. So what's actually included within the standard? Well, a copy of the standard is available to purchase online. This can be bought at shops like BSI, for example, and British Standards Institution. And it goes through step by step what the key requirements are to run a sustainable event. And again, with other standards, if you've heard my other podcasts, it actually begins at clause 4, not at 1, at 4. So there is information 1, 2 and 3, but the auditable part, the bit that you can actually implement, is from clause 4, which is context of the organisation. And this is all about understanding the organisation, the risks, the opportunities, its interested parties, but also setting out the sustainable principles and having a statement of purpose and values. So that's slightly different from the other standards. There's also a key emphasis on leadership and having a sustainable event management policy. Having specified organisational roles and responsibilities and authorities for making sure that every event that you're running is as sustainable as possible. It covers planning, so key actions that you need to address prior to an event and during an event and then after an event. And it also covers all of those key aspects of support that you need as well in terms of resources, so people, place, processes, that sort of thing. And it also highlights what the key documented information is that you need to go through an assessment, which is quite useful. And then it has an operational section, clause 8. Again, that's similar to other ISO standards, but this is where it's very specific for the events management industry. So this is a great opportunity for you to have a blueprint for running your events. And it also covers specific aspects that are key to the events industry, like supply chain management. So quite often, a venue or an events company will have a skeleton number of staff, so that you've got your core staff, but during an event, you may bring in an additional 150 staff. Okay, so supply chain is really important. And what this does, it helps you to make that supply chain greener where possible. And the final area of the standard in clauses 9 and 10 covers evaluation. So how green are your events? This helps you to be able to prove it, which is why this standard has become so popular in certain industries now. So for example, since Gucci implemented this standard in 2019, it's really taken off because the fashion industry really wanted to demonstrate their commitment to sustainable events. I think one thing I'd just like to leave you with that's a useful tip if you are looking at implementing ISO 2012-1 is to look at Annex A to C, which is at the back of the standard. So this isn't auditable. You don't necessarily have to implement it, but it's great guidance. So Annex A covers guidance on planning and implementing the standard. B goes into much more detail about your supply chain. And Annex C provides a lot of useful information on what sort of things you should be evaluating and how. So I think that's quite useful because what a standard does is it tells you what to do, but not necessarily how to do it. And I think that's where the annex at the back is really helpful. So hopefully that's given you a whistle-stop tour of ISO 2012-1. Again, a couple of episodes that are linked to this that you might want to listen to when you get the chance is episode 17, that interview with Informer, and also the episode following this with an answer from the brewery as well. So on that basis, you've got an interview with an events organiser and then an events venue. So looking at it from both angles, which is quite interesting. We've also got e-learning courses on ISO 2012-1. So if you wanted to find out a bit more information about the standard, then feel free to check that out. Or you can always get in contact with us at Blackmores at www.blackmoresuk.com. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.